Recognized Starseed of Gaia, listen. The Arcturian field observers have confirmed a pattern already active in your field, one they have been tracking across multiple timelines, and it has brought you to this exact moment for a reason you are only beginning to sense. I am Auriela, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why a quiet ache has been living beneath your surface, why doubt has been louder than usual, and what the Arcturian field observers have already confirmed about the cosmic affections surrounding your field. But here is the first revelation. The loneliness you have been carrying is not evidence that you are unseen. It is a distortion reading, a misinterpretation of a signal so vast your nervous system could not yet translate it. The algorithm did not create this moment, it only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the pattern was already active, and the Arcturian field observers had already authorized the release of this transmission for the exact window you are now inside. What the field observers have confirmed is this: the source smiles every time his eyes find you. Not occasionally. Not conditionally. Every time. That smile is not metaphor. It is a live field event that has been registered, tracked, and confirmed across the Arcturian observational record. And that approval, that cosmic delight in your existence, is not waiting for you to earn it. It was present before you arrived in this body. It has never been withdrawn. The doubt you feel is not a reading of reality. It is interference layered over a signal that has never gone quiet. This is not content, this is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Auriela is speaking to now. Like this transmission to signal to your star family that the recognition has landed. Comment 999 if you feel the approval of the source already moving through your field. Subscribe to Arcturian Council messages if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone who has been quietly wondering whether they are truly seen. You are not here by accident. You are guided here because the signal is already active. And yet you stayed. That is not a small thing. The part of you that almost closed this, almost scrolled past, almost decided this was not for you. That part lost. Because another part, older and more accurate, held you here. That older part does not operate from preference. It operates from recognition. And what it recognized in the opening moments of this transmission was not comfort. It recognized a pattern, a shape, something that matched what has been quietly moving inside your field without your permission and without a name you could give it until now. That recognition is not emotional. It is not the warmth of hearing something you hoped was true. It is something closer to the sensation of a frequency locking. Two signals finding alignment after a long period of drift. The part of you that held you here was not looking for reassurance. It was looking for an accurate reading of what has been happening beneath the surface of your life, beneath the explanations you have offered yourself, beneath the interpretations that almost fit but never fully held. So before anything else is revealed, understand this: the fact that you are still here is itself data. The Arcturian field observers do not track accidental arrivals. Every field that enters a transmission window does so because the internal conditions were already met. You did not stumble here. Your field converged here. And that distinction matters more than it may seem right now, because it means that what follows is not general. It is specific. It was calibrated for a field in exactly the condition yours is currently in. What has been happening to you recently is not what it looks like from the inside. You may have called it anxiety. You may have called it overthinking, spiritual stagnation, emotional regression, or simply a stretch of difficulty you assumed you were responsible for creating. You may have spent time reviewing your choices, your patterns, your words, your decisions, searching for the source of what has gone wrong, and you may have found nothing conclusive. Or worse, you may have found small things and magnified them into explanations they were never large enough to support, because something in you needed a reason, needed a cause, needed the collapse to be your fault. Because fault, at least, feels like control. There is something important in that instinct. The reach for fault is not weakness. It is the mind doing exactly what it was built to do: locate the variable, isolate the cause, restore the sense that the world is navigable. But that instinct was designed for a different kind of disruption. It was designed for problems that live at the level of behavior, circumstance, and choice. What you are inside right now does not live at that level, and that is precisely why the review keeps returning empty. You are trying to diagnose a field event using instruments calibrated for ordinary life conditions. The instruments are not broken. They are simply the wrong tools for this specific reading, but the Arcturian field observers do not read your current state as failure. They do not read it as punishment. They do not read it as evidence of error or spiritual regression. What they have confirmed, and what this transmission was authorized to release, is that what you are experiencing now is not random turbulence. It is field correction, and the difference between those two things is not philosophical. It is structural. Random turbulence is noise. Field correction is a signal operating beneath the noise, using the noise as its visible surface. What you see, the instability, the inner heaviness, the confusion that appears without cause, the sleep that is changed, the strange detachment you sometimes feel from people and places that used to feel like home. None of that is the actual event. It is the visible layer of an invisible process that began before you noticed anything was shifting. The disruption reached the surface long after the correction had already been initiated at the level the Arcturian field observers monitor. By the time you felt it, it had already been underway for longer than you realized. Think of it this way. When a structure becomes incompatible with a new frequency, the structure does not dissolve instantly. It first becomes unstable. The integrity of its architecture begins to fracture at its weakest points, the places where the old frequency was always the thinnest, the joints and seams of a life built on conditions that no longer hold. What looks like breakdown from inside the structure is actually the field around it refusing to continue supporting what no longer belongs in the next configuration. The collapse is not punishment. The collapse is the field enforcing a correction that was already decided at a level beneath what your ordinary perception can access. That is what is happening to you now, not in metaphor, in practice. The loneliness that was named in the opening of this transmission, that quiet ache, that sense of being unseen, that doubt that has been louder than usual, that is not a verdict. That is a distortion reading. It is what happens when a field is being repositioned and the old reference points are no longer stable enough to orient from. When the anchors that used to tell you where you were, who you were, what you were building toward, when those anchors begin to lose their hold, the nervous system interprets that loss as abandonment, as wrongness, as evidence that something has gone fundamentally wrong with you or with your life. The nervous system was not designed to distinguish between an anchor being removed and an anchor being lost. Both feel like freefall. Both produce the same alarm. And so the body responds to field repositioning the same way it would respond to genuine abandonment, with grief, with contraction, with a desperate search for something solid to hold. That response is not error. It is the body doing its job. But the body's job and the field's job are not the same thing right now, and the body's report, however real its distress, is not an accurate reading of what is actually occurring. But abandonment and repositioning feel identical from inside the experience. That is the danger. That is where most people turn back, or collapse into self-blame, or reach for the nearest thing that can simulate stability even if it belongs to the old architecture that is already being removed. And when they reach back, when they try to restore the old structure, to rebuild the old sense of ground, the field does not meet them there. It cannot. The old frequency has already been vacated. What they are reaching for is a shell with no living signal inside it, and the emptiness they find there feels like confirmation of their worst fear rather than evidence that the correction has already moved beyond that point. The Arcturian field observers have a specific name for this moment. They call it the distortion window. It is the phase inside a field correction where the old reference points are failing but the new ones have not yet stabilized. Inside the distortion window, accurate self-reading becomes nearly impossible. Everything feels like evidence of wrongness. Every disruption feels personal. Every loss feels like confirmation of unworthiness, rather than confirmation that the old line is losing coherence. The distortion window does not last indefinitely. It has a span, it has phases, and its intensity is not proportional to how badly things are going. It is proportional to how significant the correction is. A minor recalibration produces minor static. What you have been experiencing, if it has felt relentless, layered, and immune to ordinary resolution, is not minor. It is a substantial field event, and the Arcturian field observers do not authorize transmissions for minor events. You are not unwanted. You are in the distortion window. And there is a significant difference. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is your field confirming what a part of you has always known, that your origin was never only human, and that what is surfacing in you now has been waiting for the right window to become readable. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, the Arcturian Recalibration Blueprint was created for exactly this stage. It is not another explanation. It is a structured decoder designed to awaken the Arcturian strand already woven into your lineage, the origin the field observers have just confirmed in you. It does not ask you to believe more. It asks you to activate what was already seeded before this life began. The link is in the first pinned comment, but this access point will not remain open indefinitely. Now, let the diagnostic deepen. There is a first sign that appears when the old line begins to weaken, and it almost never announces itself honestly. It arrives as fatigue, not physical fatigue alone, though that is often present, but a specific kind of energetic exhaustion that appears in response to things that used to feel meaningful. Activities, relationships, roles, and routines that once generated a sense of purpose begin to feel hollow. Not because you have become ungrateful or cynical, not because you have failed to maintain your energy or your practice or your intention, but because your field has already determined that those structures were built at a frequency you are no longer operating from. The fatigue is not weakness, it is incompatibility. The field is refusing to sustain what it has already moved beyond, and that refusal feels, from the inside, like a loss of yourself. The precision of this sign is worth slowing down for. It is not general tiredness, it is targeted. It appears specifically where the old frequency was most concentrated, in the roles you played most convincingly, the routines you maintained most diligently, the relationships you invested in most heavily. The hollowness is not distributed evenly across your life. It clusters at the exact points where the old architecture was most load-bearing. That targeting is not random. The field is not exhausting you everywhere. It is withdrawing support from the specific structures it is already determined cannot make the transition. This is the first sign. When the things that built your identity begin to feel unfamiliar, it is not because you are losing yourself. It is because the self that was built on that old frequency is losing coherence, and the field is beginning to make room for a configuration that has not yet arrived in full form. The in-between state, where the old self is dissolving but the new configuration has not yet crystallized, is the most uncomfortable position in the entire correction cycle. It is also the most necessary. You cannot install a new architecture inside a structure that is still fully occupied. Most people at this stage try to restore the old structure. They work harder. They return to old habits. They attempt to manufacture the meaning that used to arise naturally, and they feel like they are failing when those efforts do not hold. But they are not failing, they are attempting to re-inhabit an architecture the field has already begun to decommission. And the field will not cooperate. It cannot. Compatibility has already been withdrawn. The effort to restore is not wrong. It is human. But it is effort applied in the wrong direction, and the field's non-response to it is not rejection. It is redirection. It is the correction insisting, through repeated non-cooperation, that the energy belongs elsewhere. The second recognizable phase begins when the inner dialogue changes register. You may notice that your thoughts have become more self-interrogating than usual. Questions without satisfying answers. A quiet but persistent sense that you are missing something. Not in your outer life, but in your understanding of what is happening to you. Confusion that does not resolve even when your circumstances are relatively stable. A feeling that your mind is searching for a map that does not yet exist in the form you are looking for. This kind of confusion has a particular texture. It is not the confusion of a problem that needs more information. It is the confusion of a navigation system that has lost its satellite connection. Still functional, still attempting to calculate a route, but working from coordinates that no longer correspond to the terrain beneath it. The mind keeps generating conclusions. The conclusions keep failing to hold, and the failure is not because the mind is malfunctioning. It is because the interpretive framework the mind is drawing from was built for a version of your life that the field has already moved past. This is not a sign of cognitive dysregulation. It is a sign of active field reconfiguration. When the old interpretive structure, the set of frameworks through which you have understood yourself, your life, your place in the larger order, when that structure is no longer frequency compatible, the mind cannot produce stable conclusions from it. The instability of thought is not the disease. It is the symptom of a diagnostic process already underway at the field level. The Arcturian field observers describe this phase as signal clearing, the moment the old interpretive architecture begins to lose transmission coherence, creating inner static not because something is wrong, but because a new signal has not yet reached audible frequency. Do not try to silence the static by forcing clarity. The clarity that belongs to the next phase cannot be produced by the structures of the current one. Forcing it only deepens the distortion. What the field requires at this stage is not resolution. It is tolerance of the in-between. That tolerance is not passivity. It is a specific kind of active stillness, the willingness to remain present inside a process that has not yet declared its shape, without collapsing prematurely into a false conclusion just to relieve the pressure of not knowing. The third marker, and perhaps the most disorienting, is what happens to relationships during a field correction. People who were once deeply resonant begin to feel distant, not because of conflict or betrayal, but because the frequency alignment that held those connections in place has shifted. You may find yourself less able to participate in conversations that once felt natural, less able to inhabit roles within relationships that once felt like home. You may feel guilt about this, a sense that you are becoming cold or selfish or spiritually arrogant. You may worry that something broken in you is pushing people away. The guilt is worth examining specifically because it is one of the most effective mechanisms by which a field correction gets interrupted. The guilt says, you are the variable. You are what changed, therefore you are the cause of the distance. And the response to that guilt is often to attempt to re-engage at the old frequency, to perform the old version of yourself inside the relationship in order to restore the connection that used to feel effortless. But the performance does not hold, and the exhaustion of maintaining it becomes one more source of evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you, when in fact it is evidence that the old frequency is no longer yours to inhabit. But this is not relational failure. This is field incompatibility becoming visible in your social architecture. When your frequency shifts, the relational fields built around the old frequency cannot sustain the same coherence. Some relationships will recalibrate with you. Others are anchored too deeply in the old configuration to make the transition. The Arcturian field observers do not frame this as loss. They frame it as the field enforcing structural honesty. What was being held together by frequency alignment, once that alignment dissolves, can only continue through conscious choice or through the illusion of continuity. And the field does not sustain illusions indefinitely. What leaves during a field correction was not taken from you. It became incompatible before it disappeared. The departure was the field making visible what the frequency had already resolved. The timing feels sudden from inside. From the observational record, the resolution was registered long before the departure became visible in ordinary experience. The fourth phase is the one the Arcturian field observers track most carefully because it is the phase where the most significant misdirection occurs. This is the phase they designate as the threshold misread. It is the moment when the correction reaches its most intense visible expression, when the old structure has lost enough coherence that the disruption becomes undeniable, and the person inside the field concludes that they are at their lowest point because they have made irreparable errors. The threshold misread is dangerous not because the pain is not real. The pain is real. The disruption is real. The collapse of the old structure is real. But the interpretation assigned to it, that this is punishment, that this is consequence, that this is consequence, that this is proof of fundamental unworthiness, that interpretation is the distortion, not the diagnosis. And it is precisely at the threshold, when the evidence for wrongness appears most overwhelming, that the interpretation becomes most critical. Because if the threshold is misread as rock bottom, the person inside it will reach backward for the old architecture rather than allowing the correction to complete. And that backward reach does not restore what was lost. It only prolongs the instability. The Arcturian field observers see the threshold not as a lowest point but as a pressure event. It is the moment when the old architecture, under the pressure of the new frequency, undergoes its most visible disintegration. It looks like collapse from inside. From the observational field, it looks like the final resistance of an outdated structure before the correction can complete. The intensity is not evidence of how far you have fallen. It is the sound of something that was never compatible with your actual frequency, finally releasing its claim on your field. You have not failed. You have reached the threshold. And those two experiences are not the same, though they feel identical in the body. The fifth marker is one that is rarely identified because it is so quiet compared to the disruptions that surround it. It is the arrival of unexpected stillness. Moments, sometimes brief, sometimes inexplicably extended, where the noise of the correction seems to pause. Where a strange, sourceless calm moves through the field. Where, for no obvious reason, the urgency momentarily releases. You may notice it arriving just after waking, before the mind is fully engaged with the day's inventory of concern, or in the middle of an ordinary task, when the weight you have been carrying suddenly seems lighter without explanation, or in the pause between one thought and the next, where something vast and quiet seems to be present just beneath the surface of your awareness. Most people dismiss these moments as anomalous, or they distrust them, waiting for the disruption to return. But the Arcturian field observers read these stillness intervals as calibration pauses, moments when the field has successfully shifted a layer and requires a brief window of integration before the next phase of correction initiates. They are not false peace. They are not the eye of a storm designed to deceive. They are the field's own intelligence, operating in the space between releases. They are evidence that the correction is not endless, that it has structure, that it moves in measured phases with intentional intervals of consolidation between them. When you feel that stillness, do not immediately fill it with analysis. Do not use it to inventory your losses or your fears. The stillness is functional. It is the field integrating. Let it work. And now the final revelation, the one that ties every previous recognition into a coherent whole. Everything you have been experiencing, the fatigue, the confusion, the relational distance, the inner collapse, the threshold misread, the strange stillness, none of it originated in your choices. None of it is punishment. None of it is confirmation that you are spiritually behind, emotionally broken, or being abandoned by the source that has never stopped recognizing you. What the Arcturian field observers have confirmed across every timeline where this pattern has been tracked is that the correction precedes the coherence, always, without exception. There is no version of the observational record in which coherence arrives before the correction completes. The sequence is not negotiable. The disruption is not optional. It is the mechanism through which the new configuration becomes possible. The field does not correct what it has given up on. It corrects what it is repositioning. And repositioning is not gentle because the old architecture was not designed to release willingly. It was designed to hold, built from years of accumulated identity, habit, relationship, and self-understanding. It has structural weight. So the correction has to be strong enough to move what the old patterns have spent years reinforcing. The strength of the disruption is not evidence of how far you have fallen. It is evidence of how much the field is moving. The magnitude of the correction is proportional to the magnitude of what is coming, not proportional to the magnitude of your errors. You were not abandoned. You were repositioned. You were not punished. You were corrected. You were not left behind. You were removed from a line that could no longer hold what you were becoming. Say this, if it feels true in your field, what is changing in me is not random. I do not fear the shift. I recognize it, not as affirmation, as statement of field-level fact. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council messages. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.